Hey guys, Infidel1258 here. Today I want to share with you a clip from a recent live event where myself and Rick on the Mountain got talking about global economics, cryptocurrency bull market, gold and silver, and the role they play in wealth preservation for people who are cognizant of the really the inflation that's undermining our entire economy. I think this is a broad reaching conversation, but I hope you'll stick around for it because I definitely find this stuff fascinating. If you do too, stick around, drop a comment, let people know, and thank you guys for your time and attention. And Rick, special thanks to Rick on the Mountain for hosting this originally. It's been on his channel for about a week. Go check out his channel. Have an amazing day, guys. God bless.
And I'm actually glad that you brought up Bull Run, because I also see that is trending on Twitter and sorry, on X, and has been something that is coming up more and more as we look towards the end of the year and next year. And what are your feelings on the greater crypto market right now? Like, how are you looking at things? How are you thinking? How are you feeling? And obviously, I'm not going to ask you for specific, orders or anything like that. But what kind of moves are you intending to make?
I think I'm interested first in I feel like there's a couple parts to the question, and one, almost like, what are my thoughts on the actual expectations around bull or prolonged bear, and then it's even like what moves with that knowledge and that kind of foundation, what moves what I might be looking at doing live with. Hang on, Rick. I just want to post a quick little yeah, I'd say first and foremost, I'm expecting, but man, I do feel like there was a kick in the pants the other day when Bitcoin broke low. It was like, what was it, 29.5 or 29.4, and then fell through that, and that seemed like a pretty important line, and it impacted a lot of, like, it impacted every crypto. But one of my major bags is XRP, and XRP was holding at that moment at the 68.70, if I recall correctly, and now when BTC fell through, XRP fell through, and there's a big number of like 54, 55 or 54 was a really important sort of line to hold, and XRP didn't hold. And so all that to say, I have been feeling very bullish. I have been quite hopeful, and I guess I still am, but I feel like some of my expectations maybe failed to hold or failed to work the way I was hoping they would work in the last couple of weeks. And so that doesn't mean I'm bearish. It just means that I am less confident and in the short term. And then so now I'm like, I don't really know what's coming next is what I'm saying. And I could easily see Bitcoin just turning around here, and I could easily see the altcoin market following. I also could, and one sort of fundamental thing that makes me think that would be, there's an election coming in your country, which impacts the rest of our world. And I wouldn't be surprised at all. And the Fed did imply that they're going to stay hawkish. They're going to keep pulling up rates in, what's his name? I forget the Fed chair right now, but he spoke recently, and he pretty much said there's going to be more to come, more rate increases to come. But I kind of doubt it. I think they got to say that because they want to fight inflation. But I actually think, and I've thought this for a while, that the markets are in a dangerous spot, because ultimately what we're talking about is you need to raise interest rates in order to quell inflation. And inflation is literally a dollar killer, and maybe even there's so many downstream negative effects from inflation. High inflation can literally tear apart your economy, and I think is already, and has in some ways already, torn apart the American economy. But
Absolutely,
it needs to be fought. So then and even fighting it doesn't mean you fix the inflation that already exists. That's one of the problems, because it's like the wood is rotten to some extent now. The foundational wood of the economy of America has rotten, because of 50, 60, ever since the disconnect from the gold, the gold standard, which I think was, oh man, it was under Nixon. So I forget what year they finally.
August 1st, 1973.
Yeah. So that was like the last time there was any connection with gold. And that major turning point has been the beginning of the rot of the economy. And that structural damage is not undone by now quelling inflation from 2023. But it's important that we quell inflation from 2023. So then you say, well, obvious answer, raise interest rates. The problem is you break the economy that way too, because the massive amount of corporate debt is like at all-time highs, and then individual debt is at all-time highs, and mortgage debt is at all-time highs, and auto debt is at all-time highs. These are the economy. Americans have leveraged themselves up based on promises, really, based on like almost a need because of how the economy has been rotten, and therefore there's not enough income in one household. Therefore you need to take massive mortgages, you need to take massive car loans, 0% interest on those car loans, 3% interest on those mortgages. But then that's now ticking up to 6-7% because of the interest rate hikes. So all this has a massive, there's this tension between we need to fight inflation, so raise rates, but then raising rates could break the economy because it makes people go bankrupt, and then they don't make their payments, and then those banks that don't have those loans lose that money, and then it's a massive problem. So there's this tension, rock and a hard place. And I bring it all up in this context to answer your question about bull market, bear market. I could see especially as we look toward the next election, I absolutely could see the Democrats pushing forward some sort of aid, some sort of stimulus pack, some sort of, inflation of some nature, whether it's put in the hands of the banks so that they can hand out more loans, or whether it's put in the hands of the public with some sort of, stimmy checks. I absolutely could see something like that happening. And because markets are, they're kind of almost holding on. Like the Dow Jones isn't tumbling, but if we saw like massive tumbles in that, then I wouldn't be surprised to see if we saw stimmy. And so this could be, in my mind, this could be weeks or short months away, where we see, especially because of the election and that the desire to be the good guy, the savior. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw massive inflation through printing to try and create stimulation so that the economy might uptick in anticipation of the next election. Because there's this tension, and we could break in two ways. They almost might need to throw money at it. That won't work long term, but that could be a fundamental consideration that I've always kind of understood could be in the background, in the back pocket of the major players here. So I don't know where we're going. I remain bullish. I am super confident that many of these tokens in the top 20 or whatever are going to be changing our world. I don't know if it's days, weeks, months away, and I'm okay with it not being. I'm not in a rush, but those thoughts I just shared with you are a bit of the framework for why, in the short term, I could imagine fireworks happening out of a fundamental sort of path, if that makes sense.
That makes absolute sense, and I think you very well elucidated kind of the pitfalls that lie on both sides of that particular equation. Do you feel like there actually is a way out? Like, do you think that the economy is actually in any way salvageable? Because I'm kind of leaning hard no on that.
Yeah. There are some simple answers, but simple answers to difficult questions are not really, I don't know. I you know what I mean? Like, it's like the simple answer, there's two simple answers. I think it's pretty much a no, unless you'd go to some sort of gold standard where you end up repricing gold at probably $10,000 or $20,000 an ounce. And what that would look like is, like, if you look back from, I think it was in the 30s, when the American government seized the gold and said, it's illegal to own gold, pure gold, as like in troy ounces, like in tokens, and what they what they did in that moment is they said, don't worry, we're going to pay you fair and square for this. They bought the gold for $20 an ounce. And that was the value of gold. Like a dollar, like if you, a $20 note, US dollar note would have said on it, like exchangeable for a gold, like an ounce of gold at that time. But then immediately after doing that, like, I mean, immediately, they just repriced gold at 30. And so it's like, can you imagine if I had a command over you, Rick, and I was like, hey, you got to sell me all your crypto assets, your Splinterlands assets. Let's say your portfolio is worth $5,000. You got to sell it to me for $2,000, and I'm going to immediately reprice it for $5,000. Like, but the power of fiat, the power of the American government, like literally they can just demand that. And if you don't want to break the law, if you don't want to hide your gold, if you don't want to hide your keys, if you don't, like, you're just compelled by that power. And so I bring that up because I honestly think the answer is no. There's no saving the economy unless there's a total turnaround and I can't see how this would happen. To be honest, I can't see how the government would get to a place where they're willing to admit that their Keynesian approach, which is what we're in, this is like a Keynesian, we can just inflate the economy to save the economy. That's at the core what they're trying to do. They want to create money to stimulate the economy, to make it grow, and then once that growth can allow it to sustain itself. That's essentially the core thesis they're working with, and they have been working with for at least 60, 70 years. But really, you might even go back to the 30s when they first
Bretton
began.
Woods,
yeah. And so I think the long answer has more to do with this. There would be one saving plan, because gold is literally the only token that's ever been acknowledged as money in a sense. And tying the dollar to gold we have this much gold and we'll say that much gold equals X amount of dollars is literally, in my mind, the one and only way that you could ever reintroduce trust and confidence in the US dollar. And that is integral for the entire ecosystem across the globe. The international economy is dependent upon the US dollar being essentially the cornerstone that they all can build upon. And I think that's falling apart now with the BRICS nations and what they're trying to do. And even you've seen China and Russia trading oil for gold. And you've seen Russia eliminating all of their, like selling off all their U.S. bonds. You've seen Russia and China. China hasn't been buying more of it. They are the nation. The globe is moving further and further from a U.S.-backed cornerstone economy and getting to a place where they can operate irrespective of what America's doing. And I think that is indicative of that the world sees the rot we talked about, the foundational rot in the economy that we spent a few minutes talking about. I think the only path is gold. I think because the world would recognize gold as money, and a dollar backed by that in a measurable and an auditable fashion could be trusted. But I don't believe, this is one last pessimistic thought, I don't actually believe that the powers that be are willing to pull that trigger. And if you look back even at Kennedy, man, like I don't know a ton about his story, but I know that he was looking at silver to back the US dollar by silver, and look what happened to him. Like you get taken out when if you're the power that be that tries to implement these, because you're talking about stealing. I forget who this is. There's a famous banker who says, it's this crazy quote. He says, I don't care who runs the nation. Just let me run the money printers, because whoever runs the printers runs the nation. Like you literally, you can't, I don't care if you make the rules, quote unquote, on the books, you're the president, you're the vice president, you're the, if I'm literally the Federal Reserve, which isn't American and isn't, you know what I mean? It gets to call the shots in terms of controlling interest rates and controlling monetary pressures. Yes, the president and the government have a communication with that, but man, this is a massive deal, and I'm not sure everybody understands how big of a deal it is. and it's unfolding in front of us, and it has been for years. Since 2008, this whole issue has been bubbling and threatening to blow up in a way that I think we could get to a place of Great Depression. This is, and if you go back and look at some of my old content, like I talk about silver stacking, I talk about, like, this is Splinterlands, pre-blockchain, because I truly believe that bullion, gold and silver bullion, it's like, meaning bullion, if you don't know what bullion means, it just means like the pure coinage.
No, it's the little cubes that you drop in your soup.
Yeah. So that's like I said, the short answer is like, no, I don't really think so. But the long answer is maybe through a path like that, but that would take a certain degree of prudence. I'm not sure the powers that be have.
Yeah, I'm very much inclined to agree with that. Like, I'm not saying that there is no way forward at all. There are definitely some very smart people in this world, and in many aspects, I am not among them. So I'm not imposing limitations on what we as a species or what we as a people can think of. But I do see the hard no part of things is whether or not those solutions would be politically palatable, and whether anybody with the ability to enact said solutions would actually have the gumption and or wherewithal to do so. And that's kind of where I get to the hard no, because anybody who is in power enough to change the status quo is benefiting too much from the status quo to actually want to change it.
Yeah. I think that's a good way of saying it. But I do think this, I forget who the man, that the number I threw out there was when I said 20,000 for an ounce of gold. It might sound ludicrous because an ounce of gold is like under 2,000 right now. But there's like math you can do, and is done by, really, I think it's Ray Dalio. If I might be mistaken about that, Ray Dalio. No, it's not Dalio. Dalio is an interesting man, though. He's got a lot to say. I've read some of his books. But let's see. Mike Maloney's another guy that if people are interested in learning more about this topic and sort of where gold and silver could play in that, you might want to check out his content. And then gold to, it sounds like a ludicrous number. Like, I know it does. Peter Schiff, he's a gold bug who talks about this topic. These guys come across as crazy to people who trust the U.S. dollar, who trust the status quo, who believe that because America has been the cornerstone of the global economy since, really, I'd say, World War II, that's always going to be the cornerstone of the global economy. Those who fall in that camp are going to think some of what I just said is crazy, and they're going to think that no, it's going to be totally fine. And I don't know that I could convince you, because I suspect there's a bit of like that. I think I'll tell you this: the anxiety and the fear that I personally felt when I began reconciling and wrestling with these topics, because I'm not talking about a little economic problem. I'm talking about a global depression. And the implications of this are enormous. Like, I mean, starvation, I mean, war, I mean, like, they're terrible and terrifying. And I don't think burying our head in the sand is the path to avoiding that. But unfortunately, burying our head in the sand is the path to avoiding the cognizance, the awareness of the concern. And that's, of course, man, that's not just because you you don't think about the problem doesn't mean the problem goes away, but that's some people's approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that it very much is a worldwide concern, that especially the typical American is ignoring that entire facet of the problem, because most Americans really don't think outside of America's borders. And so I'd say that there is a greater than 90% chance that America's economy, by and large, suffers, crumbles, or undergoes some kind of extreme metamorphosis within the relatively near future. I'm not going to try and put exact numbers on it. Again, there are people who know much more than me that are working on these things.
Yeah.
But just through paying attention and the things that I have been learning, reading, and starting to learn a lot more about economics in general, how big of a domino do you think America's economy is? So we both have already, discussed and agreed that it's going downhill, and the likelihood of any kind of actual fix is pretty low.
Mm-hmm.
How big of a deal do you think that is immediately for those who are not within this country? Like, obviously, Canada is very tied and very close,
Mm-hmm.
but even I think around the world, like, those ripples are going to be huge. How do you see that kind of scenario playing out?
Yeah, that's a fun question. I mean, fun in the sense of there's just a lot of meat on the bones, but it's not fun in the way that it'll play out.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, so the first thing is the amount of debt. Like, I don't know if everybody knows this, but when America prints bonds, they sell those bonds to interested investors. At times in the past, that might have been American citizens who just believed in the country and wanted to essentially lend America money so that there could be a good war effort. That happens in that happened in all the wars, really. But you sell bond debt, and it's like, hey, we don't have America doesn't have the money we need to continue with what we're doing here. Does anybody trust us for the next 5, 10 years, 30 years? And we'll give you give us your money from today, and we'll give you like an interest rate over the next 5, 10, 20 years. That's what bond debt is. But now it's gotten to a place where that bond debt, especially because U.S. has been the cornerstone of the economy, is not just bought by U.S. citizens or even moms and pops who just want like a little bit more interest for their kid. That would be a thing from the 80s. Even you buy a bond for your kid, $500 bond, and just let it mature over 30 years and let them get a little bit of savings. That's historically where what this would have looked like. But in a modern day sense, bond debt gets sold at marketplaces to, countries, to major banks, to corporations who want a static amount of interest over a long duration of time, 5, 10, 30 years. And so what that means is that the US owes trillions of dollars to other nations. And so a failure of the US economy could absolutely have downstream effects to failures of other economies. And I actually think, with the U.S. being the cornerstone of the economy, I think that's true. The global economy, you can't buy, technically you're not supposed to buy oil outside of U.S. dollars, meaning other nations have to hold U.S. dollars in order to transact oil. Now that's been being broken in recent years. Like I said, Russia and China were doing some stuff, and I think Iran was trying to do some stuff. And frankly, this is where one of the strangleholds that America has over the world has allowed them to retain the power longer than they might otherwise, which is SWIFT. The SWIFT network is how the globe transacts money. Different countries transact money one between another using the SWIFT network. But that's something that is archaic, outdated, slow, and it's controlled by America. And then we get things like crypto, which can solve for that. So there's a separate conversation, which I don't want to digress down there, but that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about what crypto is. But just to kind of pull it back to your question, the ramifications of America's economy suffering are massive for the global economy. There's according to my Google search here, $7.6 trillion held by foreign countries. That's U.S. Treasury debt. So that's $7.6 trillion worth of the debt, is owed to those other nations, and that money just might not get paid. Especially if there's like a war with China, some part of that's Chinese. Ultimately it just doesn't get paid, and defaulting on the debt is a massive, massive deal. It speaks to other countries and their confidence in the US dollar, and then their willingness to buy those bonds in the future. And we've seen times where those bonds just aren't bought, and then the Fed comes in and buys them because that money needs to reach those US dollars. Those bonds need to be bought And so you'll see like the Fed will buy some of the stuff. So there's all kinds of monkey business happening to kind of keep it going. I don't know when it's going to fall apart, but I think it does. And the implications for the globe are massive. And that's just one part of it. Then you might say, well, why do I care? Like an American might say, why would I care if like China doesn't get its money from us? And I think you're not understanding how the internet, this is one last point I'll say, Rick. You need to understand that our global economy is so intertwined from a manufacturing standpoint that if there was a shut off, like, I mean, look back to 2020 with the Koof Koof and the C-19 stuff. What happened there? We saw like masks not coming from China. We saw antibiotics, which I think are America's antibiotic supply is like 96 or 98% produced in India, and it just doesn't come. Like, these are critical things, and then supply lines of every kind. You saw computer parts, you saw truck parts, you saw like all these things that our nation, Canada, America, need to continue operating today come from other parts of the world, and those supply lines shut when those people don't want US dollars. When you go to them and say, hey, we need X, Y, and Z, and we want to pay you in greenbacks, and they say, we don't want greenbacks, we don't trust the value, the number printed on the paper, you don't get those products. And so, and that's the tip of the iceberg, because if you really understand what that means, you're talking about like, I think a 10 to a 30-year transition where America would suffer through a massive depression because you don't have the supplies you need, and you need to start ramping up production domestically for those things you need, and the lack that you'll experience in that generation, like, it'll be so enormous. And that's not just going to be America; it's going to be Canada too, because we don't do any of the things you know what I mean? We outsource, we send our lumber to other nations so that they can process it. It's like, we aren't ready for this sort of reset at all. And so the question is, like, one last optimistic note. The answer is individual preparation. Like, learn to literally do some of this stuff now. Maybe this is 5 years away. Maybe this is 10 years away. I don't see a path where this doesn't happen. And so take time when you have it to prepare as you see fit. That's the way I've always, ever since 2008, I've been walking that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to put a little bit of a finer point on it, you mentioned the U.S. national debt in the trillions, 32.731 trillion currently, and going up hundreds of thousands of dollars every minute. Yeah. Like, it's insane how much money we owe. So yeah, good advice for everybody. Start gardening, start growing your own food, start learning how to build something, tanning, metalwork, woodwork, whatever. Use a little bit of your time, because we all get that same amount of 24 hours every day, to prepare, because I agree with you 100%. I don't know if it's a year or 5 years or 10 years down the road, but it's definitely coming, and we are not prepared. And no society is prepared for what is coming. It is going to come down to individual preparation, and I'm not prepared. I'm more prepared than most, but I'm by far not prepared. Mm-hmm. Like that's a crazy statement to throw out there, like, yeah, to just say, oh, I'm ready for everything. Yeah. No, you're not. No. And it's one of those things of, you don't know how long it's going to take. You don't know how long you're going to have to be prepared. But when it starts to happen, you're going to realize that you had more time than you thought you did, and you still didn't have enough.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about the 30 trillion in debt. That excludes, by some people's estimates, like 200, 300, like massive crazy debt. Things like,
yeah, that's just what's reported.
Like, we're talking pensions, we're talking like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. I don't think those are included in those. Those are like, essentially, there's far greater debt than they tinker with the numbers, and they subdivide so that it looks better than it is. and it's really really bleak. And then you get into something called derivatives. If you want to go down this rabbit hole, guys, there's just so
Oh
much to
God.
learn about. But I mean, derivatives are the idea that anything that you own, any asset can be packaged with other assets and then resold, and that's a derivative of the first asset. So you have asset A. Let's just picture a Settlers of Catan, the board game. You've got wood, you've got slate, you've got sheep, and you've got a brick, and you've got wood is sold at one price and brick is sold at one price. But when I sell wood and brick together, I can sell them like in a package as a derivative. And in real economies, they do this where in a sense, you can sell the wood, but you also sell that same wood in combination with a brick. And then you sell that same wood. That I don't mean other wood. I mean literally that same wood with another brick and another slate. And those are three different packages which include the same piece of wood. And so that is called derivatives. And derivatives are happening with the US dollar in a variety of ways. This happens with mortgage-backed securities, with homes, with auto loans, so the amount of assets and debt that exists is complicated in this like exponential fashion because of this concept of derivatives and what the government, or sorry, the banks through government pressures have done with derivatives is it's terrible and terrifying once you start going down this hole.
Yeah, I'm not too well versed with derivatives myself, but I know that there is definitely some shadiness going on there, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but the worth of the derivatives economy, as astounding as it is to think about, we owe $32 trillion. The worth of the derivatives economy is something on the order of hundreds of quadrillions of dollars. Like that amount of money does not exist. If you were to put together every single hard printed dollar, gold coin, like every currency from every economy that has ever existed since the dawn of man, there is more money in this fake derivative economy than has ever actually existed on the earth combined.
That's right.
And that is just mind-blowing. Like, how do you even begin to wrap your head around that?
Yeah, I don't think we can. There are charts though that are pretty interesting, and this is where some of the gold bugs and the silver bugs, and if nobody knows what that means, just they're the people who believe in gold or silver as like a sound monetary investment. They start to bring up these factors, and you can find data on this stuff, like how much US dollar derivatives exist, and then what would it mean to bring, like I said earlier, to establish a gold-backed dollar, US dollar, because you need to what you ultimately would be doing is, are you seeing, hang on a second, I don't know, I heard a little maybe feedback there, but what you would be doing is you would be essentially calculating how many US dollars exist, and then you'd say how many gold coins exist, how many ounces of gold exist above ground, and then you would subdivide the US dollars by the ounces of gold to create a price. And that's where we start talking about $20,000 an ounce. And so this is where some of this stuff, the rubber meets the road. If we're going to find a path out, it's going to be confidence established through like a return to some sort of peg, whether it's a 50% peg, a 25% peg. It's going to have an implication on what that dollar threshold would be. But I think this could happen in my lifetime, and that's why I collect bullion. It's in my savings, and I invest in crypto, bullion, and real estate. And I think real estate could be real problematic in the future because of all these things I just alluded to. But you got to live somewhere, so.
You do indeed. How do you feel about paper gold?
Yeah, that's real dangerous in my mind. So if just briefly, just like I said about derivatives, it's not entirely dissimilar. It's this idea that JP Morgan is one of the biggest silver derivatives paper sellers. So what they'll do is JP Morgan has this product called SLV, which is it's like a piece of paper that says, "Hey, Rick, you own one token of silver, one troy ounce of silver." Well, these contracts are much bigger than that. We're talking but just for easy numbers, we're talking like you own this one piece of silver. But here's the problem. They sell, last I checked, they sold 250 of these pieces of paper for every piece of silver that they actually own. And so 250 people own that piece of silver that you own. So what happens when John goes and asks for it to be physically delivered, which means I don't want it in that vault. I don't want this piece of paper. You say I own a piece of silver. Give me my silver. That is a run on the bank. And that's what, if that happens, and I believe it will happen, you're going to see an absolute erasure of the SLV in terms of the consideration that it poses on the valuation of silver. So what does that mean? Silver currently sells for about $24 an ounce, US, and that is taking into consideration all the demand for silver that can be satisfied by the sale of SLV. So people want exposure. Certain investors, big money investors, want exposure to silver. They don't go out and buy troy ounces and store it somewhere because that costs money. Shipping costs money. Security costs money. They just choose to trust the SLV. They buy the SLV and they're okay with it because they don't actually want physical delivery. But I'm saying, if there becomes a bank run that undermines the reliability and the confidence that exists in a product like SLV, which is paper silver, then what you end up doing is erasing the impact. That will have zero, paper silver sales will have zero impact. There'll be a disconnect. You'll see paper silver certificates selling for $5 in troy ounce because they're worthless. They can't be truly cashed in on, and you'll see true physical silver being sold for 50, 60, maybe more dollars an ounce, because people who want physical delivery of the silver aren't going to trust the SLV paper. So to answer your question, I don't buy paper silver. I don't buy paper gold. I have no interest in it. I think those economies are, again, in the same way derivatives, we talked about that. It's so precarious. It's only as reliable as the confidence that the community walks in, and we're one run away from that happening. And so,
yeah, absolutely, and that's very much the same kind of outlook that I have on it. I unfortunately don't really have any stacked. Sorry, my lawn guys are here, so I'm trying to keep things muted as often as possible so
Gotcha.
that you're not getting that in your ear. But yeah, I think that the paper gold, paper silver, is exactly, all of the problems with it that you outlined. There is more there than there is there.
Yeah.
So at some point, there's going to be a run, and you're not going to be able to get it, and that is also the problem with moving back to the gold standard. As much as I feel like it would be the kind of best, most likely route to success in terms of rejuvenating the economy, it would cause so many problems and make many of the already extant problems so much worse. And it would continue to just make the rich richer and the rest of us even worse off.
Yeah.
As a follow-up, and I do expect that the answer is going to be very much the same. Have you looked at any of the gold-backed cryptos, and what is your opinion on them? Do you think that's any more trustworthy than paper gold, or do you lump them into the same category?
Yeah, maybe I'd love to. There's two things I want to answer about. One, your direct question, but then the comment on the rich getting richer. I do think you're right. If this plays out, this is what I'm talking about, is the greatest financial change that our generation will ever see. And I might be wrong. So, okay, maybe I'm wrong. Forget everything I'm saying to you. But I'm saying if you're listening to this, I think this demands a certain degree of your attention so that you can challenge and prove for yourself that no, Dwayne, I think Dwayne's mistaken because X, Y, and Z reasons. But man, don't just bury your head on it. Because you said the rich will get richer if this stuff happens. I think it's more like the people who are paying attention have an opportunity for life-changing generational wealth. And I lump crypto into that conversation. I'm actually, part of the reason I'm excited about crypto is because I think it is largely either it's not inflationary, meaning you can't just, most of them, like the good ones, like Bitcoin, there is new inflation being printed and we're about to go through a halving, which means the inflation will be cut in half. That means what I'm saying is like the number of tokens being created every 10 minutes will get cut in half next April or March or whatever it is. So when a token has a limited amount of inflation or no inflation at all, which some of the tokens do, that's interesting to me because you're actually getting into a place where, again, the core about economics is that supply versus demand. And the supply, if it's infinite and always growing, that is going to diminish its value. That's what the problem is with the US dollar. It's infinite and it's always growing. And so $1 today is not worth $1 in 1930. Houses for the longest, this is interesting, houses in America for the longest time, I mean hundreds of years, would, it'd be essentially the equivalent of $5,000. Like that's what it would have cost. And when you look at it from the perspective of like gold, you can see interesting metrics of how it would have been really stable for a very long time. And then we started creating more and more US dollars, and then housing prices started growing up. So what I'm saying is I think it's not just the rich are going to get richer in this next transition. It's that anyone really paying attention to this has an opportunity to see generational sort of life-changing opportunity. And then there was another question about SLV or oh yeah, where does crypto line up in that conversation? And what about, crypto backed by gold? I'm interested in that stuff for sure. I don't hold any of that. I guess my only criticism toward America doing this would be if there's a gold backed US dollar, if there's a crypto backed by gold, I want to know and trust the accounting that speaks to how much gold is backing it. The auditing process needs to be reliable. If that's reliable, I could get behind it. But with something where they don't even have, like the SLV, there's no cap to it. It's not like, hey, we've reached 250 per piece of paper per ounce. That's too far. Let's fill it in, or let's acquire more silver, which would be a really healthy thing to do. If they came out and said, you know what, the SLV product is we've got too much exposure, we don't have enough physical ounces, we're going to buy way more silver ounces, physical ounces, and get them delivered so that we can kind of shore up, because that would be a really healthy thing to do, a really responsible thing to do. But JP Morgan, which runs the SLV, has no interest in responsibility. They have interest in profitability, and so you're not going to see that. And so I guess my short answer is I would only be interested in a crypto backed by gold if I knew and trusted, if I knew that it was backed and the accounting proved it, I felt confident about that. But currently I don't hold any of those products.
That's pretty much where I'm at as well. And I was kind of looking to see if you have actually done any deep dives into them. The one that is sticking out in my mind, the only one I can immediately think of right now is Pax Gold, or Pax G. Which is supposed to be a 1-to-1 backed, gold, tokenized gold. And it's something that interests me, but it is something I have not done my own research on. So always DYOR, people. There's plenty of scammers out there that are looking to make a quick buck at your expense, through any number of shady means. But I kind of lump it all in together, because unless I know and trust and have that data, like my natural assumption is going to be that no, you don't have that one-to-one backing. It's all tether to me.
Yeah, definitely. And the question, but I mean, some people might say that any coin, any crypto, any dollar is backed by confidence. And you'll hear people counter the kind of the gold bug argument. The arguments I'm making are really anti-Keynesian economics. And maybe I always forget the opposite, but there's two streams of economic thought. Keynesian is what is so common in today's age, but there is a different idea, which is essentially like there has to be boom and bust cycles. We have to, like, inflation can't save the day. We have to just, what would happen if all this, in the best case scenario, truly, we would see a return to gold, the gold back standard. There would be a real season of pain, because the outside world would stop receiving US dollars and sending goods that we need. And the American economy would start building those things for themselves again. There would be, lack of jobs. There would be, starvation. There would be great destitution for a period of time. But then the economy, the domestic economy would grow, new opportunities would rise up. And some of our children or their children would have probably the best economy this country or your country has seen in, 70, 80 years since World War II. But so I'm hopeful these things will happen sooner than later, because I don't think there's a way around them. And I'd rather them happen through I'm 42. I'd rather be a hardworking, young-ish man who's capable of protecting my family, working hard, earning, value, so that I could fight through the difficult season that I expect is coming, and then see my children grow up into a thriving economy, as opposed to kick the can down the road and then, well, my kids can deal with it. Because I think those are the two options. Either it's now or later. And the U.S. economy, the Federal Reserve, they are doing everything they can to kick the can down the road. And it's not a red versus blue thing either. This is like every political party. There's only like Rand Paul, the guy, there's probably like a handful of people who are within the power structure that are pointing toward these things and intending and trying to do something about it. But almost everybody is kicking this can down the road.
Yeah, 100%. And with every boot, the problem just grows. Like it's not even kicking the can down the road; it's kicking the snowball down the mountain.
Yeah.
Like it's just getting bigger. It's just getting worse. And eventually there is going to be that impact. And yeah, I am of the mindset with you that it's better if we, nip it in the bud and try and take care of things now. But then that, circles the question back around to, but how?
Yeah.
And honestly, I feel like, well, you're correct that there would be a period where the American dollar goes down and we are not able to import things. And so there's going to be a lot of things that we just have to kind of bootstrap ourselves and return to making things at home. Mm-hmm. The world has progressed now to such a point where certain key items are so in demand, and if we were unable to receive those, then I don't know that we can actually rebuild. Mm-hmm. And the obvious answer there, or the obvious item there, would be oil. But honestly, I don't think that's it, because we do have enough of our own. Mm-hmm. But stuff like the microchips from mm-hmm. Taiwan,
yeah.
Like, we could not rebuild our economy without that kind of tech, because if we were to lose access to it, yeah. Our enemies did not, then we would end up losing a lot of our interests around the world, which is another big part of the reason why the American dollar is kind of the cornerstone of the world economy. And I see that as one of those kind of hidden catches in this problem that is one of the really difficult questions to answer, because I feel like that is a key to the entire thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's part of the absolute, like, the terrifying nature of what this all might mean, which is, it's not just, hey, this will be inconvenient. It's that there will literally be a complete lack of things that you've gotten entirely accustomed to having. I mean, like, everything from food items. Like, think of, if people, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of this idea of, there's I think it's called 100-mile diet. If you some people will strive to eat only products that are grown within 100 miles of where they live, and the
locavore lifestyle.
Yeah, it's this idea that you recognize and you strive to live within what is actually sustainable from a perspective of, it's conceivable a product that grew 100 miles from here, through trade markets, through like the local trade farmers driving around, me driving a little bit, we could actually get those products. If it was worth the drive, you might get it. But I mean, bananas, avocados, things that you take for granted don't come from anywhere near you. Antibiotics, like, that's crazy. We need antibiotics, and like 98% of it, I think it's India. It might have been China. I think I'm pretty sure it's India. Like, it's wild that America doesn't have access to that. And Trump talked about this. He's like, one of the things that he was like, we need to have access to this. And that is like, almost, in my mind, it's almost a defensive, what's the word? It's like, I think America traditionally has always had a certain amount of barrels of oil stored, just in case of a war. And then sometimes they will release those when oil prices get too high, so that they can help the domestic interest in Canada or America's, the people, to retain gas prices at a certain threshold. But they would invest a certain amount of money to see that number of barrels is there as a defensive security. And I would argue things like antibiotics are the same thing. Like, there needs to be a store of that, because it's that important. It's life-saving. So it's not like, hey, I won't get bananas. It's like important medicine might not be available. Computers might not be produced the way that they're produced today, because, like you said, circuit chips come from South Korea, or they come from some other part of the world that, conceivably isn't even going to be transacting with us, because the American dollar is worthless and nobody wants to participate with that economy or receive those dollars. And then what happens, this happens with other nations right now, by the way. Like, it's not like a theoretical thing that, hey, maybe it happens. This happens like now with certain countries, that their economies are currently melting down, and they need to then take their melting down dollar, their worthless dollar that's becoming more and more worthless through hyperinflation. They have to get more of it to then go out and buy US dollars, so that they can transact with another nation, because the other nation trusts the US dollar. But what I'm talking about is a scenario where that US dollar is so worthless that there's nobody who trusts it, so that the American government needs to then spend more and more and more, and an ever increasing number of those greenbacks, to get, let's say, like the BRICS dollar, whatever that ends up being, or a euro, so that can be internationally accepted, so that they can trade for these really key and pivotal resources. It's a massive deal. And it's not just an inconvenience. Like, and again, I just don't see how this doesn't happen eventually, because the path that we're on, even like during the C19, like, there was such a crazy amount of printing that happened in that, and the stimulation checks that went to the public. All of that was intended, like I said, to try and inflate the economy, to let it grow so that it might sustain itself. But you're blowing hot air into, I would argue, like a dead body. I think that's not the path to rejuvenating it. The metaphor of a dead body might be not quite right, because I think there's a path to reviving it, but I think it almost needs to fall apart and then a domestic resurgence through, you know, a total new focus on how America turns in and builds its own things, that would create real meaningful jobs and employment and new revenue streams and new saving, because they're not going, those people aren't going to be speculating in a stock market with their dollars and cents in that world. They're going to be saving, and true savings by the average family is a path to restoring our economy. Historically, Americans had savings to draw upon, and currently they don't. And that's in part because there's all these green candles available in the Dow Jones or in crypto. But man, there needs to be this like reset, or whether there needs to be or not, I think there's gonna be. And out of that posture of reset, you'll see a new intentionality around savings, which will then breed a new confidence in the US economy because the individuals have savings. And that will be a transformative season. But I don't know that I think it's probably decades away.
And do you think that with a reset, and we'll say, you know, hypothetical kind of best case scenario where we actually do find some kind of reset that allows us to regain our footing and start to rebuild, do you think that capitalism as a system can actually successfully exist? Or do you think that where we are now is an inevitable conclusion of exactly the way that system is designed?
Yeah, I think, I do think, first of all, I think capitalism is I don't even like the word capitalism, because I actually think it's actually the thing that I would herald as meaningful, which capitalism is, but truly capitalism has almost been like usurped the word to like to intend like what we have today, and it's not what we have today. We have cronyism today, and that means that certain entities and back scratching, you know, ne'er-do-wells are creating scenarios where, you know, for instance, the Federal Reserve prints money, the banks get first access to it, certain key banks, by the way, not all the banks, certain key banks, and then they can sell it at a profit to others. Or when massive contracts happen, it's like, hey, we're going to sell this, but you buy it, and then it goes public. All this stuff, this is cronyism. Capitalism or free markets are literally just whoever wants to transact with one another. I have good A and you have money B. Let's trade A for B. And we're both willing partners. So that's a free market. And there's X amount of demand for product A, and there's X amount of money B in the system. And that is going to create through a free market interaction, a supply and demand crunch that's going to establish a free market value. That, to me, is always going to exist as long as communism doesn't sort of reign, because that's entirely different. That communism in a nutshell is really a controlled economy. That at its core, it's the government can prescribe value. It can determine how many doctors, how many fishers, how many, you know, farmers we need. It can control all the assets and prescribe the allocation of those through a controlled economy. And I'm saying the best economy that's ever existed in the history of man is a free market where no one oversees. But I think the term is the invisible hand. I think that's from Adam, I forget his name right now. But it's this idea that the invisible hand, meaning no thoughtful person is saying we need X amount of houses in Detroit in 2023. It's actually just business entrepreneurs who see an opportunity in their local area and then take the risk of building that house at all their personal expense in the hopes that they can sell that product for greater gain. That's a free market operation. But then you wrap in cronyism, as there's, you know, all kinds of red tape and bureaucratic nonsense that slow down the production of the houses, increasing the value. It has to be, you know, CO2 emission, you know, the limited, you know, there's penalties on CO2 emissions for this product or that insulation, or the roof has to be this many years, and on and on and on. This is bureaucratic red tape, which comes out of a cronyism, because truly it starts from a place of one bureaucrat being like, I'm going to make it harder on you so you scratch my back when it's donation time, because I can then make it easier on you in certain ways. That's cronyism. That will fail. It is failing. capitalism or free markets will exist unless communism reigns. And I would argue it's the only path to freedom for humans, because if you don't have choice of action with respect to your value, with respect to your financial steps that you might want to take, buy this, don't buy that, work here, don't work there. If you don't have that, then you don't have freedom. And so I do think we can find a path to that, but it has to start with, and it all broke when we created a central bank. Central bank was the beginning of this downfall. And if you go explore what that looked like, it was like literally like secret dealings at midnight to bring together under the US government. And people were like, there's like assassinations involved in this. It sounds conspiracy theory-ish, but man, it's actually historically fact that like at one point in US history, there was no central bank. And during that time, the U.S. had a truly stable economy. And after that time, there's been this constant, I'm going to say the word growth in quotation marks in the financial economy, but it's not growth. Like the Dow Jones has gone up radically a lot. Houses have gone.
It's all a growth of debt. It's not actually a growth of the economy. But that is why, and to sure. push back a little bit, I feel like that true free market system still can't exist, because you end up getting, like, look at BlackRock. Like, could you imagine BlackRock in an actually free market? Like, they would just have taken over the world. Look at what Carnegie built. Like, and I'm not saying that he's an evil person or anything like that, but he started out, and then through developing and granted through compounding of small advantages over his competitors, he was able to take over the entire steel market for the world. Mm-hmm. That is not a situation that is going to lead to positive outcome for the majority of people. That leads to the very similar situation that we're in, where those who have the money and the power use that money and power to make things easier on themselves and harder on everyone else. And at the end of the day, every dollar that you are earning when you are at the top is on the backs of other people.
I strongly disagree, but I would say that the definition of, because you're being critical, I don't disagree with where you're being critical, but I disagree with, I think what I'm hearing your conclusion is, because you said, like, you give the example Carnegie, and then you say the dollars in their hands create they utilize that to make it easier for themselves and harder for others. That actually is what I'm critical of, which is cronyism. That's the idea, again, that like once they get money, what do they do with that money? And what do these entities and corporations do? They approach their local politician and they say, hey, you know what's dangerous? It's super dangerous if we just let's look at a modern day example. Amazon and Walmart and McDonald's, these companies are major proponents of increasing the minimum wage. Is that because Walmart and Amazon and McDonald's are, sweet people run by beautiful, well-meaning individuals?
Absolutely not.
No, it's because they are actually already entrenched in power, and they're using that existing power and financial strength to now entrench their power further by establishing barriers that will eliminate or impede new competition. What do I mean? Other burger, look at Walmart. Walmart is this megacorp, this massive blue big box building that sells everything under the sun: groceries, clothing, everything you might need for your household. So they've got this massive structure. They've got a lot of staff. They've got a lot of big profitability. They've got a recognizable name that people can trade and buy and sell. I assume they do. I actually don't know this, but I think they're publicly traded. And then you start getting this money that can be used to pursue and influence elections in ways that, hey, we'll support you, we'll donate to your political cause, John Doe, so long as you support our interests. And one of the interests we might want is because we love people. We're going to make sure that they get, it's so important. We do a $15 minimum wage. That's something that around my area is like roughly a number, but in different areas it's going to be whatever, whether it's $7, $15, $20, whatever the number is wherever you live. The idea about minimum wage is that it helps the little guy. And I would argue to you that it doesn't. And I would argue that
it is important that when you are working, that you are earning enough to make a living. But you're absolutely correct that the reason why McDonald's, Amazon, Walmart want that $15 minimum wage is because the mom and pop shop down the street cannot afford to pay their workers that wage. And therefore it eliminates the competition and allows them to rake in all of the money.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, they don't care about paying out that $15 because 90% of what they're paying their employees is already going back to that business anyways, particularly in the instance of Walmart. If you work for Walmart, you shop nowhere but Walmart. Why? Because you can't afford to shop anywhere else but Walmart. So yeah, you're 100% correct that minimum wage is not going to solve any problems, and is also the biggest corporations are the ones lobbying for it the hardest because it benefits them over anybody else. But on the flip side of that coin, if there is no minimum wage whatsoever, then they're just going to be running everybody else out of business anyways through other means and not paying their employees a living wage instead of paying or lobbying for said $15 an hour minimum wage. They're going to be lobbying against minimum wages at all, and then they're going to be absolutely paying every single one of their employees the minimum possible amount in order to maintain their operations.
Yeah, I half agree, but again, it's so the devil's in details. When you talk about the idea of they would pay them as little as they possibly could if there was no minimum wage, I would argue that that's true, but then I would go from that place and say, here's the problem with the conclusion. That means if there's no minimum wage and Walmart's offering you like nothing, let's just say like relatively nothing, and there's no minimum wage, well, you can get a better quality of work experience working at the small mom and pop where you know John Doe who owns the place and who treats you with respect and shakes your hand when you walk in the door and is glad to see you and wants you there, as opposed to this mega corporation where you don't even know the person who owns it, let alone who's present. They're not present. And I would argue little things like that start to tip the scale toward the favor of the small place. And then there can also be there can be an interesting work experience where you actually have an opportunity to impact the growth of that small little operation. You can't move as a worker at Walmart. You're not going to move the needle in terms of how well Walmart does, but at a small mom and pop, you might, because of people start coming there because they actually love the service. People start coming there because you give a slightly better product. People start coming there because they know who owns it or whatever the case may be. And so you can move the needle on that. And then even though the wage might be comparable or maybe the same, let's say in this context, because there is no minimum wage and they're both paying you, as you say, almost nothing, or let's say as little as is possible, I would say there's an outsized gain opportunity in the smaller operation, which becomes interesting to you as a participant in that ecosystem, because any gain felt by the owner, is going to be potentially enjoyed by and will be enjoyed by, to some extent, the operator who's running it. Not on a one-to-one basis. Hey, Dwayne, you did great and you're going to share my profits. But on a we're doing better, we're growing, our business is booming. And Dwayne, I see that you're part of that. And I know if you leave and go to the neighboring burger shop or whatever, they're going to enjoy that benefit. I'm actually going to then start seeing benefits. And so that's a free market response to the critique around, they won't pay you anything. I would argue in every circumstance, meritocracy is going to lead to a place where the person who carries value is going to demand that value, and they're going to create that value. And that's another separate point. The idea of they're going to create that value. In the example, in the I guess my argument is really based around the idea that there isn't finite resources that we all draw upon. There's actually an infinite amount of resources that we draw upon, but that infinite is pulled back or limited by the red tape that exists, which then diminishes new thoughtful innovation and creation, and that new thoughtful innovation and creation, which we can't even imagine right now. And you could look at SpaceX and how they like revolutionized that. You could look at what Tesla did with the Tesla vehicles. That didn't exist before them, not in any discernible, appreciable, interesting way. And yet they step into these markets and they revolutionize it. So there's a path to create new wealth, even where there's none even imagined. And that's the path that if it was truly no red tape and you would, and I'm not saying what I'm talking about would be free of problems, but what, as a bit of a olive branch between our two positions, Rick, I would say in my example, in my sort of envisioned optimistic future, you would get to a place where merit mattered, where merit was rewarded, but you weren't guaranteed anything. I don't mean I like unions can be a problem. They can go too far, and I think they have. And minimum wages can be a problem. They can go too far, and I think they have. The cronyism has led to those things. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. And if we truly were a free market, there can be problems that come out of that, because you allude to like they won't pay you anything if they don't have to. And I think that's to some extent true. So you can go too far, but I'm saying merit in that world would matter. And you absolutely can claw your way out. In fact, this was our history, man. This was, we're talking 200 years ago now, probably, as we get into this conversation, but those who worked hard would have been able to climb out. And then you might argue, well, there's certain instances around racism or whatever that they would have been literally abject poverty and there's no way out. Yes, see, there are complications with the solutions I'm proposing, but I don't really believe it's fair to say that those would. I think the core is merit. If merit matters, if it's a true meritocracy, and I think we can aim at that. That's a path to seeing a true regenerative new economy and new country. And I don't see any other path.
I understand where you're coming from, and I respect your viewpoint on this, but I also I feel like you're trying to separate capitalism from cronyism as if they can exist separately. Well, cronyism does not require capitalism. Cronyism is going to be part of any system because that is human nature. And granted, that is the downfall of other systems as well. And I am not advocating for communism here either. That is patently proven it does not work. However, I'm just saying that capitalism is also patently proven that does not work. No system that we have tried has worked, and it is time for something new, not more of the same. And I'm not saying I have the answer here as to what that could be, because I damn sure do not. And that is the big problem I feel that we're facing is we know the road we are on leads to ruin.
I think,
but if we just try and reset it, we would be on that same road.
Yeah,
we might be further back and have some more runway in front of us, but it's still the same road.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I do think there's a path, or there's a distinction that needs to be drawn between, like I said, free market and capitalism. And I would argue that it's not that my point isn't that capitalism is in and of itself bad and free market, this idea is good. It's more that capitalism, the idea, the word, has been wrapped up in this idea of cronyism, and yet most people don't even know what that word would mean. But I would argue that's why I say what we live in is the cronyism, and what we should aim at is capitalism or free market system. And you say they can't maybe be distinguished or separated, and I would argue they have historically been separated. If you look pre-central bank, I just looked it up, December 23rd, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act, making that was the time when the U.S. had a Federal Reserve for the first time. Before that, what would have happened across all countries, because I don't believe there was other Federal Reserves in other, like, I think that was the season of history where all countries started getting Federal Reserves, the central banks, I mean. And before that, what happened was you would see these busts and booms in a domestic economy, because what would happen is a country would their gold was their money. And so what would happen is country A would have X amount of gold in their country, like literally physical gold within the four walls of their country. And when they needed to buy things they don't produce, it either came from gold they had in their stores, or it came from gold they had in their ground, and that was it. Or they didn't get it. And so you spent gold and it went out the doors, or you gained gold as you sold products others needed. And that was how trade happened. But you know what happened? A consequence that people hated about that, if you look back and study history, is that country would have seasons where you're creating or offering services that's drawing in gold. That's going to create a boom. And then you're going to have seasons where people don't desire your products, your resources, your innovations, etc. And you're going to see an outpouring of the gold. And that has an impact on your domestic economy, and it means you have bust and booms. And we thought we could create this central bank that would avoid those, and by introducing a US, like a currency token, we could stabilize, erase all busts, and stabilize, and return to boom cycles. Every time we're about to bust, we could return to a boom by printing more of this currency, so that we can prop up the failing economy, survive the bear, and then reach the next bull. That's in the nutshell what we did in 1913 when the U.S. moved to a central bank, and every nation followed suit. And in 1930, when they moved away from the gold standard partially, and in 1960, whatever you said it was, when they moved away finally, this is the outpouring ever since 1913. And literal, like, presidents. Like, there were, oh man, I wish I could, I might need to find it offline. I don't want to show a piece of material to you that's from a different YouTube page, but there's this amazing 30-minute video that comic caricaturizes and like makes it humorous. This whole idea that pre-Federal Reserve, pre-central bank, there was like a stable economy. Houses cost, it was like 5 years worth of sort of income is what you would have needed to buy a house. And now we're in my area, you're talking probably 50 grand is average income, and we're talking $1 million houses. So, I mean, that if you start to measure income, annual income versus, cost of a house, that's one way you start to see how that whole core moment is what broke, and is what's the problem, and is, where some of the, because you talked about like sustainable living. You talked about how an enterprise that's paying its team needs to pay them appropriately so they can live. I totally agree, but here's the problem. It all comes back to how we've wrought and degraded and erased the value of the currency we're paying you with, which is a problem of currency, not of money. Money is there's a distinction, and again, this is a Mike Maloney thing. If you guys want to go check him out, he says money is something that it's money that it's divisible, transferable, portable. It has all the characteristics of historic, thousands of human histories, of our years of human history. Gold was money, and it's good at being money. But then we make currency, and it's terrible at being money, because you can make as much of it as you want. And that's where things fell apart, where it starts to be, how do I live off this wage? It comes from that place of the dollar you're being paid with is being rotten. It's being rotted at its core by not accidental, not oops, how did this happen, but by intentional corruption and cronyism, where banks are literally controlling how the Federal Reserve. Let this blow your mind. Rick, you might know this, but anybody listening, the Federal Reserve prints a dollar into existence. It never existed before that. And they spend that dollar at a dollar value. Like, this is worth $1. Here, I created it out of thin air, and I'm going to give it to you, Rick. Now, you are going to be the second spender of that. But because I just created $1 out of thin air, I diluted the system of dollars that exists. I made more of them. Now each of them is worth less. Even though it's only $1 in my example, I've diminished that dollar's value by creating that one to give to you. And when you start to say, well, it's not just $1, it's trillions of dollars. I print trillions to give you trillions. It actually has a noticeable impact on what the buying power of that is. And this is so keenly observed as you look at the cost of houses. People like that their houses go up in value when you own a house. But you've heard more and more and more over the last 10, 20 years, this new generation will never buy a house. Why? It's because, I'm telling you right now, guys, it's because the dollar is being diluted through creation, because this cronyism exists where the Fed, which we've empowered and is not American, is allowed to print US dollars to then give to the American government to spend in however they see fit. So they're the second spender of it. The Fed gets full value, US government gets, like, let's say 95 cents on a dollar, and then it goes to that downstream through the banks, and you're going to get 92 cents on a dollar. And I'm saying it's been rotten to the place where it's probably something like 1 penny for what would have been a historic US dollar. Like, I mean, 100 years ago, before the Fed did what it did, I literally think $1 then, and you can look at this, you can see how much a suit would have cost as compared to an annual salary, how much a house would have cost as compared to an annual salary, how much food would have cost. All of this stuff can be measured then versus now, and you really see that, especially housing costs, it was so stable for hundreds of years. And then we tried this experiment with money and currency. And that's where all of the rot comes from. And so that's why I go back to the beginning of the conversation, Rick, where I talked about that gold back. If we could get to a place where, and this is maybe a big if, but if we can get to a place where we truly believe that the US dollar is gold backed, and I don't mean they say it is and it's not really, and they don't actually have the gold like JP Morgan is doing with silver. I mean, if
actual one-to-one backing.
Yeah, or even, it doesn't have to be 1-to-1. It could be 2-to-1, or some people are advocates of a 25%. Like, so you know, and then you start getting into a question of, well, you'd have to immediately, that's why I talked about $20,000 gold, because you'd have to immediately, recognizing how many US dollar currency units exist, you'd have to essentially measure that. And then you'd have to say, okay, divide that by however many gold units we have. Okay, I guess every gold unit is worth 20 grand now. And overnight that could happen. And then in that moment, you'd be saying, look, anyone who has 20 grand can come get a gold coin for me. And if that was upheld, which, by the way, at one time during Nixon, they literally closed that gold window. So again, you'd have to prove that you're willing to walk that out. But if you walk that out, you're going to see a total end to inflation, to the sort of the monetary efforts that have created the worthlessness of the dollar, and therefore the worthlessness of the wage, and therefore the, you know, almost the frustration of this generation where I can't buy a house, I can't earn a meaningful living. It's like worthless, and people like feel there's a frustration that exists. It's coming out of this core historic event. The central bank creation, monetary change from gold to dollars, and then the erasure and the rotting of that dollar. And that's why I say it's cronyism, because that is literally these few bank guys being like, hey, this would be really great for us. Again, he said, I forget who said that, but he's like, I don't care who runs the country, just let me run the money printers. That is what we're talking about. And it's all interconnected to your criticisms too, which I agree with, but I just feel like it's like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, maybe the knife's being put in the wrong place. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with 90% of what you say. Like we're in agreement on a lot of things, but whereas it seems like you are pointing to the creation of the central bank as the cause of cronyism, I regard it as the natural outgrowth of the cronyism that was already inherent within the capitalist structure.
Interesting. That's
It's just
it's hard to disprove that. I definitely, I have to admit, I can't say to you, I can't prove to you, no, you're wrong there. You know what I mean? And I would argue, I'm willing to even say, as I look back, when we're offline, I'm going to try and find this cool video. It's a 30-minute, like I said, cartoon caricature of this whole historic moment. And it's funny, it's entertaining, it's deeply accurate and thoughtful. And it talks about this was like literally a usurping of the US government that happened, and people don't even recognize it because it's the United States Federal Reserve but that it's not, the Federal Reserve is not American. It's not.
Yeah.
And so
it's not the US, it's not federal, and it's not a reserve.
Yeah.
It is the worst name in history.
And so they literally,
aside maybe from Northwest.
And so, but to come back to your point, you know, this was like in my mind, this was an overtaking. And I think you're saying essentially that overtaking, that like usurping, is destined to happen in a system where, you know, there's free market profitability available to individuals. And I think you're right, at least as far as it will take strong, brilliant advocates. And it did take strong, brilliant advocates. Some presidents who like literally, there's gunfights that broke out over this stuff. And like I say, I don't believe for a second that JFK got disappeared like he did. I think it's because of what he was going to do with silver. JFK, silver-backed dollar. I think he was the last president. This is called Executive Order 11110. The Senate passed a bill on May 23rd by a vote of 68 to 10. Kennedy signed the bill into law on June 4th, 1963, and on the same day signed an executive order authorizing Treasury Security to continue printing silver certificates during this transition period. This was going to be the implementation of a silver-backed dollar. And the people who run the printers took care of this guy. So I'm saying there absolutely is a war that can happen here. Like, I don't mean war in like a literal guns sense. I mean, like, there's a battle that has to happen with good men who recognize what you're describing, the proclivity to let's say malicious growth within this system, those who would want to steal and sort of extract without putting back. And then there are people like Kennedy and maybe, other politicians that exist today. There's a few that I could name that would fight for the purity and maybe the clarity of vision that I think is possible to allow generationally this to be renewed. And then there'd be a new fight in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years where there'd need to be a new set of visionaries who are fighting that fight. So it isn't something that I'm saying could be one established and fortified forever. It's something that needs to be established and fought for eternally, because you're right, people are terrible to one another, and certain individuals will be so terrible that they will do everything they can to entrench their own power and extract from others. But I'm saying I truly believe there's a path where, for optimism, if certain people I guess fight for it effectively, like Kennedy was trying to do.
Now, do you think that it is possible, given a successful reset or of some sort? Again, we'll give the hypotheticals here of the best case scenario. Is there a way that we as a species can grow beyond the conditions that lead from a system that did work better. Because, yeah, I mean, before the creation of the central bank, before we went off the gold standard, everything like that, things were better. They were not problem-free by any means. But, and there were other situations at that time in which society was much, much worse. But do you think it is possible for us as a species to actually grow or evolve beyond this cronyism?
Yeah,
as you're labeling it.
I do think so. I think, but I think there's a famous theologian who says something like, no, he's not even a theologian. It might have been like, it was a famous author. The line of good versus evil runs through the human heart. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, the line between good and evil runs not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart. And I think this is important to the conversation we're having, because it's not like there are good guys that wear blue and there are bad guys who wear red, or there's good guys who wear red and there's bad guys who wear blue. It's like every individual is either advocating for optimal growth for your nation, my nation, and the greater good of humanity, probably. I truly believe, I say this a lot at my church to different people who serve in different capacities. I don't know if you know this, Rick, but I work at my church. I oversee our guest services, which means like all of our the sort of welcoming services, people that stand at the door and greet you, the people that help you find a seat in the auditorium, etc. And these people come and they serve for free at our church because they believe that the topic that we're teaching about matters. And I like to tell them that, because I'm convinced that people often think they can have they're unable to have a discernible impact on the outcome of good or evil, that as they perceive it. But I'm so adamant, I'm so convinced that an individual has an opportunity to be of eternal significance. I think we're actually made for and called into working good, creating order from chaos, establishing things for the betterment of ourselves. But then Jordan Peterson would argue that the betterment of yourself is a really complex idea, because there's the you of today, August 28, 2023. There's the you of tomorrow. There's the you of 5 years from now. There's the you of 20 years from now. And all of those have differing or possibly even incongruent desires. It might be good for you to eat a sundae today. Is it good for Rick in 20 years that you eat Sundays every day? No. And so there's this balancing act that we are always working out. We're making a million little decisions. C.S. Lewis says we're making a million little decisions every day that are working yourself to be something closer to like a demon that if you saw it today, it would haunt your nightmares, or an angel that if you saw it today, you'd bend down in your knees and worship. Like, we're literally working toward eternally something of beauty or horror. And I think it's like I said with marriage at the beginning of the cast here. You know, we want to believe that in order to move the needle for good or evil, you have to make it some sort of grandiose action. And I don't think that's true at all. I think the line between good and evil runs through every human heart, meaning every one of us has this opportunity to enact these sort of little changes, whether it's how you treat your spouse, how you treat your children, how you treat yourself, how you earn a living. These million little decisions you're working are going to have they're going to have impact on those that are in your circle, and then your circle is going to have impact on other circles, and then etc. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, if Rick tries his best, suddenly the world's going to be perfect. But it means this is Jordan Peterson again. He just talks about like how, you know, you can't worry about those massive goals like, hey, the world's falling apart, or hey, you know, cronyism seems inevitable. You almost just have to focus on, because there's no hope in that. There's no peace in that. There is only frustration and disappointment, because you're striving, again, like I said about the marriage thing, if you're aiming at perfect and perfect is the only thing you can ever have, then yeah, you're never gonna get there. You're gonna be disappointed. You're gonna feel frustration, and it's just an empty existence. I think we need to focus, therefore, on what we can do in the moment we're given, within the reach we have, and that's why Jordan Peterson talks about like clean your room. It matters. People say, "Oh, that's so stupid. It's so trivial." No, it matters because it's like you're creating beauty, you're creating order from chaos, and it has its impact. Some people will tell you, you know, if you don't clean your car, it says something about your character, your stress. If these things matter to your day, and then therefore they matter to your relationships, and then your relationships impact your wife and your children, and then others. And so, I think these are battles that we have to fight on a smaller scale through conversations like this, maybe even where I don't know if 10 people are going to see this, 100, 1,000, I don't know, but like, is this even a battle that we're having right now that hopefully brings our community, or even just me and you, Rick, to a different place where we're like, okay, there's something I can do, and that's a place of hope and optimism, even if it's not going to be the hope and optimism of therefore perfect is attainable. It's like, I can move the needle. The people who serve or who set up chairs at my church might feel like they're not doing anything, but they're participating in the creation of a system that does something bigger, something in my mind eternally important. And so when we pour ourselves out at good goals with the eternal in mind, I think that's where we get the growth we truly want. And then we start influencing others and we see even more of it. And it's not perfect. It's not a short-term response. But I think that is the thought and the process that I'm walking in when I talk about this money stuff, and how I speculate about how it would be possible to get to a place where we run a free market and we fight off cronyism. Because we have to remember too, we haven't touched on this at all, but Rick, like the free market system, the capitalist system, the cronyism that we're running right now has had positive impacts on the world. It's created technological innovation that never could have happened, that has saved lives, that has created moments, that like has allowed us to explore the moon and maybe other places soon, Mars, according to SpaceX. You know, that doesn't happen under the boot of a controlled economy. And I know you're not advocating for that, but I just want to, really delineate between the two ends that I see. So is this perfect? No. Could it be better? Yes. I think the path to making it better is through every one of us fighting as we can by understanding it first, speaking about it second, and, acting it out third. That might mean that we don't shop at Walmart. That might mean we pay a little extra to shop at the mom and pop. There's ways we can walk this out, and they actually can have positive ramifications for today and tomorrow and the future.
I again agree with a lot of what you're saying, and there is that personal responsibility, and the onus is on each of us individually to take those steps. However, my question was not on an individual level, but can we as a species get past the personal desires and the greed that is what is causing these problems?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, as a religious man, my answer is like, not in this world. And we are broken, we are sinful, and that's why that Solzhenitsyn quote is like so appropriate, because it's like, the evil isn't out there that we need to quell. It's right here. And as long as, and one of my old pastors says this about a church, when you find a perfect church, don't go there because you'll ruin it, because you're not perfect. And the point is, neither am I, and neither is anybody. And like, that's why the answer to your question is no, we can't, we won't. But through the act of understanding the importance of the conversation that you're raising, and through the act of understanding the fact that we are the broken ones, like I'm trying to say, then we can hopefully get to a place where more people fight for that good that we want than fight for that evil and that extraction and whatnot. that's the only thing in this world, man. Like, we hopefully the good wins more, but truthfully, I don't think there's a final victory here. I think that literally there's corruption in our human heart, and if and it literally takes something external outside to then erase and fix and end that, because that is in us.
And that is something that, well, I have some minor disagreements on some of the finer points of it. In some, I agree absolutely. I don't think that there is a way forward whereby we as a species, we as the human race, can conquer these problems, because we are at the heart, the source of these problems.
Yeah, it's
and
yeah.
I think that is a wonderful place to call it. And I realize that we are coming up on 3. I want to be respectful of your time. So have a few minutes. You can share with the crowd how you would like them to be able to find you, any parting words or final thoughts that you would like to share. Basically, whatever you want to talk about, the mic is yours for a few minutes. Have at.
Yeah, man. Just first of all, thanks for the conversation. Thanks for that you reached out. It was a lot of fun. And these things I think these things matter. I think sometimes, probably at some points during this conversation, I suspect people feel or felt like, oh man, like this is so doom and gloom. Because the way I talk about the economy, but man, I think it's so deeply important to explore the depths of concern that we might actually have, so that we can have an answer to them, and that we can, to the best of our abilities, like I said earlier, work solutions. And so, yeah, that's where my head's at, where my heart's at. I hope that's interesting to those who watch, and maybe those who will watch. And if you want to know more about sort of me and what I'm into, you can come check me out on YouTube. Dwayne Cunningham on YouTube. Infidel1258 is my Splinterlands account, and you'll find me. You might see me in the battle arena on Splinterlands. You can find me on Twitter or X at I'm N Attention. That's the letter N in the middle there. And yeah, guys, thank you so much for the time. I really enjoyed it. And Rick, I'm definitely gonna find that video. I want you to see this one. It's really cool later on. But thanks for the conversation, dude.
My pleasure, absolutely. And thank you all so very much for watching. As always, I have been Rick. You've been on the mountain. It has been a wonderful time.